Coming up now on Animal Outtakes.
We have several different ecosystems out here on the ranch that we take people through. Pine flats, there's swamps, freshwater marshes, and pastures still out here, not developed.
And
here's a dead fish. There's more over there washed up. There's horseshoe crabs all over. What could have caused this?
marine animals are washing up, all dead. What's causing it? Inspector Planet is on the case. And it all comes down to communication and what keeps your dog's interest. The right way to teach your dog a new skill. This and much more straight ahead on Animal Outtakes. An ecosystem is a group of living and non-living things, all interacting with each other in a specific environment, and each has their own specific purpose. What better way to enjoy some of Florida's ecosystems than to explore them on a swamp buggy tour? For Edward Babcock, there was something about this place, and it had an appeal like no other. And in the early 1900s, he purchased more than 90,000 acres here in Southwest Florida.
Rhonda, for those of us who live here in Florida, we've always heard so much about Babcock Ranch. And it has a very, very rich history. So in a snippet, give us that history.
Oh, of course. All right, so the ranch was once owned by a gentleman known as Edward Vos Babcock. Mr. Babcock was from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In fact, he was the mayor of Pittsburgh from 1918 to 1922. His family has been involved with the lumber industry since 1887. And Mr. Babcock used to come down in these areas, so he took notice of all the longleaf pine growing in this area, so he decided to purchase the ranch in 1914.
Babcock Ranch is still a working ranch today. Most of the land was sold to the state of Florida with the stipulation that more than 70,000 acres be kept as a preserve. This agreement is one of the largest single land preservation purchases in Florida state history. There is no better way to really experience the ranch than with a swamp buggy tour.
At the top there, there's a snowy egret, and the blackbird that you see to our left, that is known as the anhinga.
During our 90-minute ride with Rhonda, we went through 4 different ecosystems and were able to find lots of different animals. The first ecosystem, the freshwater marsh.
You might see a gator. The bubbles every now and then can be made by catfish. Catfish actually like to come up and breathe there. But there's also sunfish and turtles as well.
Birds and white-tailed deer can also be found hiding in the tall grass. But it was the alligators that got our attention.
The female lays 30 to 50 eggs. Only about 10% of her eggs will survive to hatching because they fall victim to animals like possums, raccoons, even the wild hogs will snack on the eggs. Once they hatch, only about 5% of our hatchlings will survive to 1 year because they also fall victim to other alligators.
We've never been able to see wild baby gators so close. Next, the ecosystem known as the Pine Flats.
Now, the slash pine
This area of the ranch is populated with palmettos and other trees, more than 900 different species in fact. Bees and all sorts of insects can be found here also.
Turpentine. Here's Rosie. Notice how her eyes match her coat.
Then it was on to the pasture. This is home to the ranch's cracker cattle.
Hi, Spike. Would you like corn? Do you want lots of corn? Do you want 2 scoops? You want 2 scoops or 3? Okay, fine.
Rhonda says these cracker cattle are descendants from the original bloodline of cattle brought over to Florida from Spanish conquistador Ponce de Leon. Out here in the pasture, we not only saw cattle, but birds like cranes and turkeys.
They make an incredibly loud, ear-piercing sound.
And some nuisance animals too.
We have a hog on the left and we got 3 on the right.
These hogs are a pain. They tear up the pasture by digging deep holes which can injure the cattle. Why? They're looking for a snack. That nose is pretty powerful. They can detect food that is 25 feet underground or food that's 7 miles away.
All right, so remember I said they call it the telegraph swamp. If you look out in front of my buggy, it'll be on your right as I go by, right next to the road. It's strung through the trees here. My right-hand mirror is going to be next to it in about 3 seconds. This is actually wiring that was once part of the telegraph that was used here on the ranch. The wiring from the telegraph runs all the way from the ranch. It goes all the way down to Punta Rasa, which is right by the Sanibel Bridge. It actually goes underneath the Gulf of Mexico all the way over to Cuba. The International Ocean Telegraph Company had an office right there in Punta Rasa. In fact, this is the original telegraph that was used in the announcing of the sinking the battleship Maine. That announcement then triggered the Spanish-American War of 1898. Now notice as we go along what looks to be like pointy tree stumps all throughout this area. Those are actually called the cypress knee. The cypress knee is the support system of the cypress tree. It is not a root system. Now the Babcocks were nature lovers as well. They were very conscious about leaving a lot of the trees behind when they harvested the cypress. So the smaller ones in here range from 50 to 80 years old, but the bigger ones in here range from 100 all the way up to 250 years old.
Why is this so important that adults and children alike come out here and learn about the ecosystems?
Well, I think it's very important for everyone to come out and learn because it will teach you how important it is to keep our lands preserved, protect our wildlife. You know, there's not much left, shall I say, out there that are preserved, and we all want to learn how we all play our part in protecting the land here in Florida. It's very important for everybody to learn that, I believe.
Think about the ecosystems in your own backyard. Who and what lives there? And how do they all interact with each other? If you'd like more information on Babcock Ranch Eco Tours, head to their website. And while you're out there, make sure to stop in for a bite at the Gator Shack restaurant. Chef John does not disappoint. Next, there's a mystery that needs solving. Fish and other marine animals are dying. Our Inspector Planet is on the case, and she's using science to find answers. Every dog deserves a lifelong loving home. Dante's Den provides a pristine, comfortable haven for dogs that have been abandoned or surrendered by their owners. We ensure that every pup in our Joyful Dogs adoption program receives lots of love and attention, is properly immunized, spayed or neutered, and is in good health. Prospective pet parents undergo a thorough adoption review to ensure a lifetime of love and care. Find your new furry best friend at Dante's Den. For more information, go to dantesden.org or call 844-DANTES-DEN. Dante's Den, continuing the love.
People have asked me what it'll cost to restore all the corals back the way they remember. But I have to ask them, what will it cost if we don't do anything?
You can be sure your furry friend continues to be loved and cared for even when you can no longer be there for them. Dante's Den provides a permanent, loving home for dogs whose owners have set up a lifetime care program for their beloved companion. We honor the trust placed in us by providing loving care, spacious dens, on-site veterinary care, and plenty of room to run and play. For more information, go to dantesden.org or call 844-DANTES-DEN. Dante's Den, continuing the love. Science is everywhere, and it's all around us. It's observing the world, forming questions, and the willingness to find the answers. It's something our Inspector Planet does every day, And you can too.
Hi, I'm Dr. Tracy Fanara. I'm an environmental engineer, which means that I use different scientific principles to protect the environment, humans, and wildlife. At Mote Marine Laboratory, I answer questions using investigation and myth busting. So today we're going, oh man, I just got a report of dead fish at a nearby beach. We should check it out. Good thing I bring all of my lab gear wherever I go because there's always a science experiment to be done. So the first thing we need to do, start collecting. Picking up some of the dead creatures we see and also getting a sample of the water. Looking under a microscope, we can check this water sample right away. Since our collection, I've gotten many more reports of dead fish at coastal beaches, as well as respiratory irritation, meaning that it causes people to cough or sneeze, itchy eyes, runny nose. So this tells us that this could be a biological toxin. So the first thing we're going to do is look underneath the microscope and see if there are harmful species of algae. One that's very common in the Gulf of Mexico is Karenia brevis, also known as Florida red tide. Looking at the sample underneath a microscope, we'll know that it's Karenia brevis by its shape, size, and movement. And actually, this right here is called HABscope. It's a NASA-funded project that we're working on with NOAA and GCUS. What this does is allows citizen scientists to take a sample of water, put it underneath the microscope, upload a 30-second video into an app that has an algorithm that automatically calculates the concentration of red tide by its shape, size, and swimming pattern. That information automatically goes to a NOAA respiratory irritation model, so we have real-time results. Looking at the sample right now, I can tell you there's a high concentration of Karenia brevis, which is commonly called Florida red tide. This can definitely be the reason for the fish kills because Florida red tide emits a toxin. It's called brevetoxin, which can not only kill aquatic life, manatees, fish, turtles, even sharks, but can also aerosolize, meaning that it goes into the air and it attaches onto particles in the air so that when wind comes and moves that air onshore to where people are on the beach, people can experience that coughing and respiratory irritation like we saw reported on Seasick. Ah, there we go, there's my sample. Oh wow, okay. So we can see that there are many Karenia brevis samples, and we know that because they have a very distinct swimming pattern. It's kind of like a leaf blowing in the wind or like a corkscrew. We can see that this sample has an extremely high concentration of Karenia brevis or Florida red tide. These concentrations are likely over 1 million cells per liter. Let's upload it into the app and see what the app calculates the concentration of red tide cells to be. We get over 70% of our oxygen from phytoplankton. About 1 to 2% of those phytoplankton are harmful. Florida red tide is one of those species. It's a naturally occurring phenomenon that initiates or starts off the coast of Florida at the ocean bottom. With currents and upwelling, blooms are brought to the surface, and with currents and winds, they're brought onshore, causing respiratory irritation in humans and also harm to aquatic life. Because it is a naturally occurring phenomena, the only thing we can really do to protect ourselves right now is alert the public of where effects are so that they can make healthy decisions when going to a beach. At Mote Marine Laboratory, we are working on mitigation strategies. One of those is the living dock. It's using biological filter feeders like crabs and mussels and other organisms that remove the toxin from the water column and hopefully alleviates the effects of red tide. So let's go check out our experiment. So as we saw in our sample, concentrations of red tide here are over 30 million cells per liter. And unfortunately, that concentration was too much for most of our filter feeders to survive and alleviate those effects of red tide. Although we still, no, I'm sorry. I am sorry. Aww, they're all dead. So the way that the toxin affects most aquatic life is by blocking off the sodium channels in their respiratory system. Basically, by suffocating them. But also the bigger mammals like manatee, they eat seagrass, and that toxin accumulates on something called epiphytes, which are on that seagrass. So that's how it gets into their bloodstream and affects other nervous system functions. Because this is a naturally occurring phenomenon, the best thing that we can do to protect the public is to alert them of where red tide effects are. That's why we have the Beach Conditions Reporting System at visitbeaches.org and CSIC, which we already saw earlier. We're also at Mo Marine Laboratory working on a number of different mitigation strategies, including ozonation, which is advanced water treatment, as well as predation to see what predators Karenia has and what parasites might affect Karenia. We need to find out what Karenia's kryptonite is. We know that red tide would be around whether humans were here or not, but we need to understand what role we play in the intensity and duration of red tide blooms and find ways to alleviate those effects. The way we do that is through experimentation and investigation, and maybe it'll be you that will figure that out. Remember, anyone can be a scientist or an engineer with some passion, hard work, and curiosity of how the world works.
Become a citizen scientist by downloading the free app. If you live near the water, you can collect water samples and share your findings with Mote marine scientists like our Inspector Planet. We know red tide can affect marine animals, and you and I can even show symptoms associated with this type of algae bloom. But can it also affect our house pets? Ask the Vet is coming up next. As you know, the entire nation is focused on us now for the Florida red tide. And we are known all over the world now for this horrible, horrible situation. How does it affect our pets? We know how it affects us. Does it do the same for the pets?
Yes, pets are affected by red tide also, especially if your dog is at the beach and swimming in the water, or eating, the dead fish and maybe dead shellfish on the beach. It's an algae, and the one we have, I understand, is somewhat particular for our area because there are other red tides elsewhere. But this one certainly is quite toxic to the fish. It's a central nervous system toxin. They eat it, they die, they float up on the beach, and then if the dogs, of course, dogs love smelly, disgusting things to eat and chew on. The smellier the better, usually. So if your pet eats it, they certainly will get affected and can get seriously ill. They will also show neurologic signs, vomiting, diarrhea, tremors, just not quite right mentally, any kind of abnormal neurologic sign, but then it can progress to seizures and coma and even death. So it's quite serious. So certainly don't take your dog to the beach. That would be the number one thing if you know the red tide is in your area. But if you happen to be there and you don't know it, and then you realize that you want to wash the pet off as much as you can with some fresh water, get the toxins off the body, because they'll lick themselves, they'll ingest it that way. Interesting, when I read up on this a little bit, the foam in the water actually has 10 times the concentration, up to 10 times the concentration of the toxin that the water does.
Oh dear.
So the foam is really bad if your pet's playing in the, I guess the shallow with the foamy stuff coming in.
I live on the water, and I'm not having as much of the smell because I live on the bay side, but I've noticed my dogs have been sneezing.
Yes.
They don't do that.
Well, the toxins get released into the air also, evidently just the wave action ruptures the algae, and then the toxins get released into the air, and people have respiratory issues, especially if they have asthma, bronchitis, emphysema. Pets can have similar issues, so dogs can have, and I imagine cats too, breathing issues from the toxins. So, and it also can go about a mile inland, depending on the wind and the direction. So you don't have to be right at the beach for your pets potentially to have respiratory issues, breathing issues. Little sneezing wouldn't bother me, but if your pet has bronchitis, asthma, then of course it could be much more serious.
Could that bring on those situations, possibly?
I don't know if it can really, you mean like a permanent asthma condition in your dog? I don't know if that can happen, but certainly an episode, if they get an episode of asthma or bronchitis from it, I could certainly understand it happening that isolated time. I don't know if it would really cause long-term issues.
So the best advice that we could give during the Florida red tide, and it's here to stay for a while, is keep the dogs off the beach, keep them off of the water. But when we have our dogs inside and we've got the air conditioning going, what do we do?
Yeah, I don't know what
Just
else you
hope for
can
the
do.
best.
Yeah, unless you live really close to the beach, you hopefully won't have any respiratory issues for yourself or your pets. But yeah, I don't know what else you could do except move further away from the
Well,
beach.
we're not going to do that, but our scientists, especially over at Moat, our dear friends at Moat, are doing investigations of the Florida red tide, and hopefully we will have some answers very quickly. Jessie makes training a dog look easy, but is it really something that you and I can do ourselves? Tips and tricks is next.
And just like with cum, we're using a lot of...
People have asked me what it'll cost to restore all the corals back to the way they remember. But I have to ask them, what will it cost if we don't do anything?
Zeus will do just about anything for a treat. Sit. But what about your dog? What will get them to listen? Jessie with Upbeat Canine says it's all about the way you communicate with your dog and what will get their attention. Good boy. So much of what we talk about, Jessie, is positive reinforcement, which equates to rewards.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, what kind of rewards are we talking about? Is it food all the time, or can it be something else?
It depends on the dog. Right? Some dogs will work for their food, and that's why we always suggest, all right, well, if you're going to make their meals anyway, that's a perfect opportunity to do some training, and they're the most hungry. Some dogs could care less about food, and they're not going to work for it, and they might like praise, they might like a toy, they might like something else. Right? So every dog's a little different. Typically with our puppies, we do a lot of food stuff. And with that, we have to start incorporating some kind of marker. Like people use a clicker or their voice, but we have to somehow equate you sat, and that's what I wanted, to here comes the food. So we use free. So if he sits and I say free, he comes and gets the food. If people use a clicker and he sits and they click, that marks to the dog, okay, I did the right thing, here comes the food. Place. Good boy. Free. And just like with come, we're using a lot of treats in the beginning. The leash is on so I can help him if he decides not to do it. But I want him to enjoy doing it first, show him how to do it, and then we'll show him that he has to do it. Place. Good.
You speak about verbal. Any inflection in the voice that would change that? Do we get a higher pitch, or do we go, oh, little Fido, you did good? Or do we keep it very professional?
You know, I talk to all the dogs I train just like I'm talking to you. So if it's a real little puppy, sometimes I might get more excited to get them more interested in stuff because they're all over the place. But the bottom line is I want people to relax when they're training their dogs, so I want them to talk in a conversation tone. And as long as you reinforce it, you know, a lot of people are used to yelling at their dogs or adding in a million different words. As long as you reinforce the one command that you're giving, like a sit or a down or a come, that's all that matters.
We've heard the statement so many times. Can you teach that dog, an old dog, new tricks? Can you take a year-old dog or a 2-year-old dog that's not coming, not staying, not obeying commands? Can you teach them?
Absolutely.
So age has nothing to do with it?
It doesn't. As long as you're clear, right? As long as everything is black and white, because the dog's black and white's the most important, right? So if you say come and the only thing that works is coming to you, that's what I'm going to do. Doesn't matter how old they are. And we used to work with a lot of senior dogs. The oldest dog I ever trained was 13 and a half, and he had plenty of success.
So there's hope for me too.
Oh, absolutely.
We hope you had fun and learned a thing or two along the way. We'll be back here again next week with even more animals and some wild adventures. Until then, thanks for watching. I feel like Johnny Depp is going to come out of here somewhere.
Please, God.
It's like Pirates of the Caribbean right here.
Good thing I bring all of my lab gear wherever I go because there's always a science experiment to be done.
A well-trained, behaved dog is so important, and it just makes things a lot easier and safer for both of you.
Okay, Zeus.
Here we go.